Hey, this is Ramon, Channel Alpha 4. I'm still missing a mic. I usually record 2 or 3 in a row. So it's going to be a few weeks, well, I guess months for you guys before you see me with a microphone again. And my cat might be talking. But anyway, this is my Bible study, chapter 21 of Genesis. And here's the recap. The birth of Isaac, Isaac and Ishmael, the brothers deal with each other. Abraham has a dispute with Abimelech, and there is a covenant between Abraham and Abimelech at Beersheba. So let's give you the notes. Isaac is born, though most of this chapter actually focuses on Hagar. This story is said to influence Luke's story of John the Baptist and the baby Jesus. I got that note from a Cambridge commentary. No, an Oxford commentary. So I didn't come up with that thought on my own, just to be clear. Hagar is treated unfairly by Sarah, and Abraham, though Abraham does show some concern, if not compassion, for his son Ishmael. So he doesn't really show a lot of concern for Hagar, but he does show concern for Ishmael. Ishmael will be a great nation, is the promise given to Ishmael when he shows this concern. So that's good that Abraham is shown to be a good father. Now, there is a controversy here, though, within the text, which is the age of Ishmael becomes a concern for those who want this story to be literal, because the age of Ishmael jumps around. Previous chapter to this chapter to the next chapter, the age changes depending on how you're viewing the story. So if you want this to be a literal story, you're going to have a hard time explaining the age jump. Me personally, when I read the story, my heart was with Hagar. And I feel that she was mistreated terribly here. I don't know what I would have done if I was in Abraham's position, or how I would have felt. But Sarah's treatment of Hagar was definitely unfair. It was actually a relief for me when she was given a promise, given a covenant by an angel. Though I did not understand why Ishmael was an archer. I think I've seen some commentaries that hint that the Ishmaelites were known to be archers. So because they were archers, he therefore would have been a great archer. I don't really know if that's true. I don't even remember where I read that, but that's apparently the explanation for that. Although I don't know much about the Ishmaelites, and all the commentaries that I read mention the Ishmaelites. They don't mention who they are or where they're from. So I don't even know if they're a real historical people or not. I'm assuming that they are, because the descendants of the Ishmaelites are real people. So, here's hoping. Then you jump back to Abraham and back to that dispute with Abimelech. And I think this one here is the workers were basically arguing over a well. And Abraham agrees to purchase the well for 7 ewe lambs. Now, this is actually very important because in a pre-writing, these are my notes, in a pre-writing, pre-textual society, it's the oral stories and traditions that give you your legal rights. So if you are going to have a proof of property rights, you need to have a oral tradition, a story that is very well known that says that this land was yours and that you bought it legitimately. So that's what this is. This is a story of Abraham buying the well. These are oral traditions to prove property rights in ancient times. Okay. Also mentioned here are the Philistines. Okay, and this is of special note. Anyone who's really interested in the Bronze Age collapse and the beginning of the Greek Dark Ages, this story is super important because the Philistines are a cross-reference to an Egyptian inscription of the Sea People. And the Sea People are the ones who are blamed for the events that led to the Bronze Age collapse. That being said, some scholars do consider this reference anachronistic. Basically, the Hebrews, when they were writing this story, were like, we know about the Sea People, we know about the Philistines, let's put that reference into the story before this before these people would have been known. Okay? For instance, you'll see mention of camels throughout here in the English translations, and even the Spanish translations. Camels weren't in that area of the world at that time. So you can make the argument of, well, maybe it was a different animal. Maybe the word that we're translating as camel doesn't mean camel when this was written. You can make a lot of good excuses or a lot of good reasoning because, to be honest with you, a lot of the words that for animals are not necessarily the words that were used. It's just a translator decided that that word means that thing, and the professor or whoever did that first translation had such a convincing case that people, when they do the lexicons, have decided those words match up. So there is a legitimate argument to be made that what we were translating as camels actually means something like donkeys. But that being said, camels are anachronistic, and the Philistines mentioned here, which adds legitimacy to this chapter, could also be anachronistic. So there you go. All right, so now here are my questions. Are you ready for the questions? Is Hagar's fate a result of Sarah's initial mistrust in the promise of an heir and the land? In other words, remember how in the previous chapter we were talking about unintended consequences, and that you not being involved in the initial event doesn't free you from the consequences of the event that happened? Okay, so Hagar's being punished here not for her misdeeds, but for the misdeeds or for the mistrust of Sarah. And that's why Sarah's presented in a negative light. Okay, that's a way to understand this story. Does Sarah's jealousy change your view of the great matriarchs? A lot of people concentrate on the patriarchs, but these are also the stories of the matriarchs. And does her jealousy change your view of them? If your mother acted like Sarah does in these stories, would you still be okay with your mother? How would that affect how you would feel about her? Now, how do you view and treat the outcast in your life? This is a story about outcasts, this specific chapter. I don't like the way that Sarah acts here. I don't like the way that Hagar is mistreated here. And it makes me wonder how I would feel if that was my wife that did that to someone, or if I was one of the children, if that was, my mother who did that to a maid who had an affair with my father. It's an interesting question, right? Well, here's the other question of how do you treat the outcast in your life? The people who, like for instance, with me, I had a mother who died, which made the people in my school weary of me. And I started to dress in all black, and I started to listen to weird music, and of course that made them even more weary of me. So I became an outcast for a while. How do you treat the people in your life who disturb your understanding and your standing and your position in your life? So you have an idea of who you are. You have an idea of how your life's supposed to go, and then suddenly here's this person who's going against what you want, who is living their life differently than you, and suddenly you don't like them. They represent a problem. They represent anomalous information. So what do? Sarah says get rid of her. But how do you treat people who make your life more difficult? Not because they're doing anything bad, but because your understanding or your misunderstandings have made them an enemy. How do you make peace with them? In Christianity, there's an answer to this. In Judaism, at this point of the stories, the answer is exile. Is that the proper answer? I don't know. I don't think so. Give me your opinion. Talk about whether or not you've been an outcast at any point in your life. Let me know how you think outcasts should be treated, and what happens when the outcast becomes the majority. We'll find that out in a few chapters with Esau, who yeah, I think he's an interesting character. All right, that was chapter 21. I will see you in the next one.